We're continuing with this notion of reconceptualizing art, and earth art, earthworks, land art is another way to take art of the gallery, but a kind of new tactic that we haven't seen. It's another way to create art that isn't a commodity. In fact, it cannot exist as a commodity. Earthworks are often large, placed in desolate areas far removed from large population centers, and these works are largely known through photographs and documentation. This movement emerges in the 70s, kind of concurrent with the first iteration of the modern environmental movement. This is when we see Rachel Carson publish her seminal book, Silent Spring. This is the founding of Earth Day. People begin to do radical things like recycle and compost, all of the things that we are still discussing today and have become ever more urgent as we see the dire effects of climate change. Let's look at Spiral Jetty. It's this massive earthwork that Robert Smithson created in the middle of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. He hired union labor to distribute earth in the lake at this isolated site. And he's not interested in creating a work that can be bought and sold in a gallery, shown in blockbuster exhibitions in New York. In fact, he knows it is meant to disappear. He called it a monument to disintegration. And I think this is a question that earth art poses to us. Why spend thousands of dollars doing something that is hard for people to see and can be destroyed? And I think for Smithson, he wanted something to he wanted to comment on the ever-changing effects of the environment, and he wanted a work that cannot be moved, this kind of extreme site specificity. Similarly, Walter de Maria put up 400 steel poles across a 1 mile by 1 kilometer plot in the New Mexico desert. It cannot be bought and sold. You have to travel to the extreme desert to view this, and it creates a kind of sublime effect. I think all earth art, this kind of, the notion of the sublime that comes from 19th century romanticism that creates this feeling of awe and wonder, maybe a little bit of fear as well too, with this use of natural phenomena in art. He's not restricting or controlling the lightning, but he's using these lightning rods to essentially connect the land and the sky. JeanClaude and Christo are a husband-wife team of conceptual artists that also created huge land art installations. One of their more recent examples are the orange gates that were put up in Central Park, but they've also done things in more remote areas, like this running fence that goes through Sonoma and Marin counties in Northern California. Again, this was a huge project. It cut through 59 private farms and ranches. It took 2 years to plan, 4 years to execute the artwork. There were 18 public hearings about it. They hired 400 union workers to complete this. They had a 500-page environmental impact report. It cost $3 million, and it was up for 2 weeks. To create this singular event, this site-specific event that brings people into dialogue, that connects different community groups for this singular event. We're going to finish up this week talking about feminist art. And what kicks off the feminist art movement of the 70s is an essay that art historian Linda Nochlin publishes in 1971, where she asks the question, why have there been no great women artists? And she goes on to answer that question by saying it's not because women are less talented or not as intelligent, but the reason we don't see great women artists on par with men in art history is because institutions have excluded women. Those institutions of education, of art institutions like museums and galleries, salons, academies. And so it is through institutional change that opens up equal opportunities for women. And we can think about the institutional change that came to the United States in the 70s with things like Title IX legislation, the effort to pass the Equal Rights Amendment that is still ongoing today. And we look at really two different waves of feminism. So the first wave of feminism is the women's suffrage movement that began in the late 19th century, culminated in the passing of the 19th Amendment in 1920. But here we're looking at these later waves of feminism that want to assert the legitimacy of women's art and women's contributions in the history of art. And the third wave really to critique the patriarchy of history and the innate sexism of history and even the construct of gender itself. I love this work. This is an early feminist painting by Sylvia Slay called The Turkish Bath, where we see a bunch of naked dudes just kind of lounging around in this room full of brightly patterned textiles. This is a great example of role reversal because Sylvia Slay is taking the classic 19th century subject of a Turkish bath, but now men are being objectified just as women traditionally had been. She's challenging the gaze as it's understood as a male gaze on a female nude. Perhaps one of the most famous monuments of feminist art is Judy Chicago's multimedia installation called The Dinner Party. She collaborated with over 100 women artists, partially to break away from that myth of the individual artistic, moody, misunderstood genius. The Dinner Party is a triangular table where nobody sits at the head, but instead we see 39 place settings dedicated to mythic and historical women whose work and achievements have often been written out of history. It includes people like Georgia O'Keeffe, whose plate we see here. It also includes the Byzantine Empress Theodora, Sappho, Virginia Woolf, Sojourner Truth. And we also see in the individual place settings a focus on ceramics, embroidery, all of these so-called feminine arts that whose importance and significance has often been downplayed. For a long time, this work did not have a permanent home. It sat in a storage unit, but now it's on permanent display in the Brooklyn Museum of Art. And when it was first shown, there were a number of congressional hearings and people worrying, kind of crying pornography when looking at the dinner party because of the vaginal imagery that we see on each of these individual place settings. Miriam Schapiro, along with Judy Chicago, co-led the Feminist Arts program at Cal State. And Schapiro leads a kind of subgroup of feminist art called Pattern and Decoration. The Pattern and Decoration movement, it turns to pattern and decoration in, again, those so-called feminine arts of quilting, embroidery, sewing, needlepoint, and says this is a political act. We think about modernism and the drive towards abstraction, rejecting decoration, rejecting pattern. And that aesthetic ignores the contribution of women in textile arts. And so Shapiro said, quote, I wanted to validate the traditional activities of women, to connect myself to unknown women artists who made quilts, who had done the invisible women's work of civilization. I wanted to acknowledge them and to honor them, end quote. So she actually coins a term for this type of collage. She says it is a femmage, F-E-M-M-A-G-E, a feminist collage that includes the female dominated traditions of sewing, quilting, applique, and needlework. Ana Mendieta was born in Cuba, but was relocated with thousands of Cuban children after the '59 revolution. And so she grew up in Iowa. And she fuses feminist art, earth art, and performance in her works. She calls her work earth body sculpture. These are ephemeral landscape interventions in the spirit of earth art that only survive as photographs. They are smaller in scale than a lot of other artwork, earth art, and they're firmly rooted in her female body. She says that she wanted to carry out a dialogue between the landscape and the female body, and that she connects it to being uprooted, traumatically torn away from her homeland during her adolescence. And she wants to reestablish this bond in her own art. The common criticism of second wave feminism is that it focused on the experience of white upper middle class women. And so Black women often sought to think about the ways that misogyny, sexism, and racism intersected in their lives. And Faith Ringgold founded the Black Women's Artists Group in 1979 called Where We At. Here is her reinterpretation of the American flag done in 1969, the year of the moon landing. And, that famous image of the American flag being planted on the moon as a kind of imperialist symbol. She wants to rethink that, to say, the flag is a complex symbol, and it can be a subversive or a revolutionary symbol. Think about the way Jasper Johns reconceptualized the flag in his work. So she, of course, takes out the stripes and redoes the die N-word slogan here across the stars and stripes. And she uses the colors of red, green, and black, which are the colors of the Black Power movement and African liberation. Let me end, though, with Aunt Jemima. Aunt Jemima has a very long history of racist stereotyping of Black women in the United States. And Betty Saar wanted to reimagine Aunt Jemima. And I think Betty Saar is celebrating this year, especially as the Aunt Jemima, the racist caricature of the Black mammy figure, is finally being retired from food marketing, along with her racist colleague, Uncle Ben. You can still see this in things like Land O'Lakes products as well. But here, long before Aunt Jemima was removed from the shelves, we see a very different imagining of her, with the Black Power fist raised in revolution in the front, and a gun and a rifle here leaning against her hip. It gives her grin a new meaning, allowing her to kind of take some of her own power back.